Hello. Good morning, folks. Did you sleep well last night? I slept. I didn't. There was a drone that came to my window. I slept okay. I don't get up in the mornings, though. Good morning, Comcast. Is Comcast here? The Comcast folks were so sweet. They came up to me after, we were teasing Comcast. They came up to me afterwards and said, is there anything we can do to help with your household Comcast problems? Which this is a story that I'm going to bring back to my household in Savannah. The sweetness of Comcast. It's really amazing. Are you all ready for some stories? Okay, now, first of all, let me just say this. Standing up here and telling a story is the scariest thing in the world. So we're going to need more than that little golf clap. For example, at Cooper Union a couple of years ago, Warren McDonald told his story, which is the story of how he lost his limbs in a hiking accident and then was out on this mountainside with a boulder pinning him down for a couple of days. Finally, helicopters came. They cut his legs off. They got him out. Subsequently, he returned to climbing, climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with no legs. And after he told this story at Cooper Union, which is, remember, where Abraham Lincoln launched his political career, so it's an intense place. And when he was done, he came out to the wings, and I leaned over and I said, "So how was that?" And he said, "That's the scariest thing I've ever done in my life." So for that, we need to appreciate these folks. So I'm just going to try to see if I'd like to split the room into two sections here, right down the middle here. Everybody in this room, you're the alphas. And let's hear a big cheer for storytelling. Okay, now we'll see what the betas can do. All right, from this side of the room, cheer the courage it takes to stand up here. Okay, so the betas have become the alphas now. So the way this works is Monica Honig, and let's give her a cheer as well. Yay! She's done such an amazing job. But Monica is going to be the timekeeper. We're going to help you guys out and not let people go forever and ever. And so at 4 minutes, Monica is going to make a little sound to just remind people that, they're going on a little bit. See, it's so sweet. It's just like they're just saying, "Look, delicate flower, we know your tail is so important, but maybe pick it up a little bit." And then if they keep talking a little bit longer, if they go on for a while, we'll have another little reminder, which is to say, get off the fucking stage, delicate flower. Okay. So remember that you must cheer these folks when they come up. We have a sort of a tradition in our Moth and storytelling communities. We don't introduce people with a lot of fancy biographical data. That's interesting. Freudian slip. We introduced them. We asked everybody a question. And because this is such a beautiful place, I thought it would be interesting to ask people a question about where they would like to be. We said, where would you like to be if you could be anywhere else other than this paradise? where would that be? Because I wanted to see what sort of dreamy things these people are thinking. It's interesting that these storytellers who are going to speak to you today, I've heard their stories, and all of their storytellers, all of the stories are a little dreamy, and they're a little bit of supernatural, which you would not expect, I think, from marketers and content creators. I mean, it's a beautiful, soft collection of stories here. And the other theme that keeps appearing is Italy. Our first storyteller, Therese, said if she could be anywhere else other than this paradise, she'd like to be on a beachfront cafe in Taormina, Sicily. Will you all welcome warmly, please, Therese Amiro.
So, in college, I was a music major, and my instrument of choice was violin. Now, I was a good violin player. I was good enough to make a little bit of money playing various gigs, like weddings in quartet groups or local community plays in the pit orchestra. And I had a classmate who was an excellent violinist. He was really good. And he was playing in a local theater here in Palo Alto. And he couldn't make one of the performances. And he came up to me and he asked me if I would substitute for him for this upcoming performance. So knowing that he's a much better violinist than I had to ask the question, so how difficult is this score? And he's just like, oh, it's Oliver. It's simple. It's a musical. You've done musicals before. But there's this little part in there that, it'll be a little challenging, but you can get through it. It's okay. So I was like, well, all right, okay, I'll do it for you. So the plan was we were going to meet at the theater, and they have a dress rehearsal before the performance. So I was going to show up for the dress rehearsal, and he and I were going to play together. And, that way I'd get my practice in before the performance an hour later, right? So I show up, and I remember the day, it was a little rainy outside. Actually, it was a lot rainy outside. And there was some thunder and lightning, which is a little unusual for Northern California. East Coasters, you know that it's a common occurrence. Here, not so much. But I figure, this is perfect weather to be indoors for a matinee. And so I get there, and we start the dress rehearsal, and I'm sitting next to my friend, and we play, and through the first half of it goes pretty easy, nothing to worry about. So then we start the second half, and then on the stage, the second half begins with this boy who's playing Oliver, walks on the stage, and the stage goes black. And the spotlight comes on the little boy as he's walking in there, and he begins his dialogue. And the conductor lifts up, his hands and is indicating to my friend, okay, here's your part where you come in. And he starts playing along with the kid on the stage. And I'm watching him, and I'm going, wow, he's a really great player. And he's playing this passage, and he's playing, and it's all beautiful, and I'm watching him. And it's really hard. And then suddenly I realize, oh my God, this is me. This is what I have to play. And I'm freaking out, and this panicked look came over my face, and the conductor, as he's conducting my friend there, he sees that look on my face, and he gets this little grin like, oh, he didn't tell her about this part. And it's this repartee that goes back and forth between the violin player and the actor on stage, and it is exposed. And I am freaking out, and it's going, oh, this is going to take a lot of time. So I go off, and we end with the dress rehearsal ends. The performance is going to start in 30 minutes. I go off in the corner of a room, and I'm practicing as hard as I can. It's like, no, people are going to think I'm killing a cat. This sucks. Oh my God, I am so nervous. I can't do this. I am panicked. And everybody's walking by me and patting me on the back going, you can do this, you can do this, you can get through this. And so the first half, we get in there, the show starts. The first half goes great, everything's fine. Intermission comes up, I'm back in my corner, I'm just not getting it, I'm not getting it. I'm panicked, I'm sweaty, I'm nervous, I can't do this. Intermission's over, the lights go down, the audience is back in the theater, and the spotlight comes up, the little kid walks on there. I'm standing there, I'm so nervous, and I'm staring at the conductor, and I'm thinking, God, just please get me through this. You know, everything inside of me is panic, panic, panic. Oops. My heart's beating, and I'm sitting there, and the conductor lifts his hands, and just before he gives me the signal to play, the electricity goes out. There was a power failure.
That was great. Ah, that's great. Teresa Miro, everybody. Yay! I love that sheer rapture and ecstasy at the moment that the electricity goes out and we don't have to perform. The fear of this performing is, but it's also this fear that we should be feasting upon, because it is, you know, when you perform musically, or when you're telling a story, or at any time that you're presenting before people, this is the most important thing that you'll do. And we like to have people come up and tell these stories because it's a way to get used to this fear and to learn how to, you know, you put this fear inside you and it energizes you. Let's see if it does that for our next storyteller, who said, when I asked where he would like to be other than this blissful place, he said, I'd rather be home with my wife and kids. It was very sweet. And maybe he is just a little fearful of coming up here. So let's give him a huge round of applause. German Siebel.
Thank you, George, for all the impossible training you gave me yesterday. So I really want to tell a spooky story. Are you ready for a spooky story? So my background is in anthropology. And I took my first steps as an anthropologist back in Russia in the early 90s. So I'm Russian by origin and moved to the US in 1997. And in those days, you know, so Russia was still an emerging or a re-emerging market. And different Russian corporate firms would sponsor, you know, consumer research. And sometimes this consumer research, you know, would take, you know, to very remote parts of Russia. So Russia is remote in and of itself, and there are parts of Russia that are even more remote. And there are parts of Russia, you know, where at that time you couldn't even access, you know, through normal means of transportation. So I was thrown into one of those areas, you know, for 3 months, and I was supposed to talk to people, talk to villagers, and collect, you know, all the information, you know, I could find about their lives, about the way they consume products, about the way why they don't consume products, how they manage their finances, how they work their fields, how they work their forests, you know, all of that stuff. And in the course of that exploration, you know, they told me a lot of stories. You know, those were people, you know, who thrived on stories. They love telling stories to other people, especially to people who they don't know, who come from places like Moscow or St. Petersburg. And among some of those stories, you know, were stories of witchcraft, stories of magic, stories of supernatural. And I was not a rational believer in all of those stories, although those people were very, very serious about it. And because they were so serious, you know, that made me take them seriously. So over time, I embraced them emotionally, if not even believing rationally. And after being bombarded with those stories for a good, you know, 2-3 weeks at a time, you kind of, you know, change yourself a little bit, change your perception of the world. So at some point, you know, I had to travel, you know, to a very remote location, you know, to a village that was so far away that there was only one bus, you know, that will take you there once a day. And if you miss that bus, you know, you're really stuck there. And between the bus stop and the village, there is probably a 5-mile hike, you know, that anybody had to take, you know, through forest and fields. So I'm with these people, you know, from the morning on, you know, talking to them, doing videography, collecting, preparing reports, you know, for all those farmer and automotive clients, you know, that were expecting me back in St. Petersburg, and listening to their stories as well. Is one of those stories, you know, that kept coming up through all of my travels with them, with the story of a shepherd. a shepherd in those local communities was a magician, because he would take the herd out into the wild, into the forest and fields, for a few days. He would sleep with the animals for several nights at a time, and they believed that he would encounter supernatural forces in there, evil spirits. That's why he had to be protected, and he had to be protected by magical means. So all shepherds in those communities, had a stick, like a walking cane, very ornately made, very nicely done, like local craftsmen would craft them for the shepherds, and the shepherd would pass it along to their children, to their sons. There was a local heirloom, and people really, really appreciated and believed in those canes. So they kept telling me all of those stories, and then I got engrossed in those stories so much, that I realized, that I'm being late, for my bus. And I packed all my gear, started rushing and going toward that trail, that would take me 5 miles toward, the bus stop. And I knew, if I missed that bus stop, I will have no shelter, as it was getting dark. And if I missed the bus stop, missed the bus, I won't be able to continue my research, the next day, because it was completely messed up my schedule. So I was a little bit under pressure, and I messed up, the timing a little bit. So as I was starting going down that trail, and trying to walk as fast as I can, suddenly by the side of the road, I saw a stick. A stick, that was like a tree branch, but a tree branch, that you can grab, clutch on, and keep walking and use it as a walking stick. And the moment, I grabbed it, slowly I started feeling personal transformation. Believe it or not, I started feeling that I'm becoming that shepherd. And this is the magical stick, that will empower me on my 5-mile hike. It was an amazing kind of spiritual experience, It's like in that commercial from Snickers, you're not yourself when you're hungry. So I was not feeling myself. I didn't feel myself like an anthropologist going and talking to people. I felt myself like a local shepherd, a magician. So as I was walking and I was approaching the bus stop, and I was thinking, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. It's way past its time of arrival. And then suddenly, as I come up to the bus stop, here it is. The bus is just pulling in. So it was supposed to have been there, an hour before. It just arrived, when I arrived. And I felt, that someone else, those supernatural forces messed up, the driver's schedule, so I shouldn't mess up mine. And at the end of the day, I made it on time, so I traveled home, safely, and my journey, through those places continued. But what I realized, is that moment, when I became a local shepherd, I also became an anthropologist. That was my initiation into the craft, because anthropology is ultimately a discipline that puts itself, into other people's shoes. And that's what I became. Thank you.
Beautiful. Okay, let's give it up one more time for Gandalf the Grey. You have a spiritual connection with Greyhound. I have a spiritual connection with Comcast. Our next storyteller said that if she could be anywhere in the world right now other than here, she'd be in Sleeping Bear Dunes in northern Michigan with my husband and daughter. Give it up for Melissa Ackerman.
Can you guys hear me okay? All right. So with that same husband, a few months ago, we were in Italy on vacation. We left our 2-year-old at home with grandma, and we're taking kind of a post-baby moon. And 3 days into the trip, as married couples will probably know, we were bickering. And we're in Rome, and we're fighting about God knows what. And we decided, let's just take a day to ourselves and see some sights and then regroup later tonight. But instead of going to see the Pantheon or Colosseum, which my husband was presumably doing, I decide to rent a car, drive halfway across the country to Bagnoli, Italy. It is the tiny village where my family came from, and I wanted to see it. I really had nothing to get me there other than just a paper map that they gave me at the car rental shop, and then this GPS that didn't work, and then my broken Italian. So I drive what should be the 2.5 hours to get there, stopping every, it seems like, couple miles to ask some farmer on a tractor for directions. And I finally make it there 4 hours later. The sun is setting, and I got to tell you, like the thing you have to know about Bagnoli is that when my grandparents left, they always described it as a very impoverished place. You know, they didn't have electricity every single day of the week until the 1970s. You were considered rich if you had a donkey. So imagine my surprise when I get there and I see this little nugget of a village sitting on the top of a mountain, just surrounded by these beautiful, lush green hills, and it was bathed in this gorgeous golden sunlight, and I thought it was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. So I go into town and I park the car in the little piazza, and there's families playing, children running around, and I poke around in some of the little shops there, and I go into this one, and there's this little old lady sitting in their chair, and she reminds me of my great-grandmother, and she's dressed head to toe in this long black dress, black head wrap, very traditional kind of garb, and she doesn't speak any English, like nobody in this town does. So I try and ask her, like, you know, hey, as I'm ordering some pizza, do you happen to know my grandfather, Bunny Mocha? And she's like, what? And so, you know, we get into a conversation. No, she doesn't know him, but maybe her son does. So she brings her son up, and then her grandson. And before I know it, half of the town is here in this little shop looking to meet the crazy ragazza americana, as they were calling me. What is she doing here? So, you know, I don't end up meeting anybody that knows my family, despite the fact that the Mocha surname is like printed on one of the bar bottles that they had in one of the town bars. Like, okay. So I, you know, decide after 2 hours of stories and touring the city and just meeting lovely people that it's time to go. It's getting dark. I got to go back down the windy mountain roads. And I get in the car, and I put the key in the ignition, and I turn it, and the car doesn't start. So I try a few more times, muttering some very choice curse words to myself. And I fortunately have like a group of older gentlemen who are still sitting in the piazza there. And they come over, do you need assistance? I'm like, yes, what do I do? So they bring in this town mechanic, this little 85-year-old man who jumps out from his dinner, comes to check it out, and he can't figure it out. And I don't have a cell phone that works in the company. Don't tell Eileen, Liz. I was unplugged. And so I have no way to reach the rental car company. So one of the guys in the kind of posse that I had amassed of people wondering what the heck is this crazy person doing offers up his cell phone, and we get a hold of the car company and what are the logistics. And before I know it, a tow truck is coming to take the car, and I'm learning that there's not a way out of this town until tomorrow morning when I get a bus that'll take me to a train, that'll take me to another train back to Rome in time to then take our train to Florence that we had booked together. So I'm panicked. I'm thinking, what do I do? And just relying on the kindness of strangers. You know, one of the women who was there in this little group of followers offers to drive me the couple miles out of town to the hotel. And fortunately, they have a hotel. 5 years ago, they didn't. So I'm going down there, and she's asking me questions, you know, like, what are you doing here? Where's your husband? Are you married? Like, why are you traveling alone? What's a single girl doing here if she's married? Why aren't you with your husband? Like, she couldn't wrap her head around it. And different culture. And so she goes, well, you're quite the adventurer, aren't you? I stop and think. I'm like, adventure? I mean, I wasn't pinned under a rock losing limbs. I don't think of myself that way. But I just look at her and I go, yeah, I guess I am. So.
Oh, that's beautiful, darling. Oh. Let's give it up one more time. Melissa Ackerman. And what I love about you people is, and by the way, so many of you came up and talked to me yesterday after my talk throughout the day. Everybody was so sweet and just telling me the happiest stories. And then these stories this morning start with Therese telling us about the rapture she felt when the lights went off, and then moving on, Guillermin telling about carrying his stick and the rapture he felt when the bus came, and Melissa, the rapture that she felt with when they called her an adventurer in Italy. And it's just, you guys are just so happy. It's really scary. It's like I'm with a group of hobbits here. But I'm really happy to be with you and to be a hobbit myself. And so our last storyteller also brings us back to blissful Italy. And when I asked what place she'd rather be other than here, she said Rome. Please give a big welcome to Renata Sadunas.
Hello. It's great. I can't see anyone's faces, so it's like I'm talking to nobody. So when I was 23, I quit my job and moved to Italy. I was raised in the US. I had an Italian mother. Well, my grandparents were born in Italy on the maternal side. My dad was born in Lithuania. So I always related very strongly to my parents' cultural backgrounds. And so when I was 23, I moved to Italy. I wanted to learn the language. I had never been there before. And I decided to go as a volunteer and work with mentally and physically handicapped adults. Much to my dismay when I got there, I learned that Italians didn't consider me Italian because, of course, I wasn't. I was American. But it was still a great environment for me to learn. And I found myself really accepted into this community that I was working in. And I developed my sort of favorite residents in the community. For example, there was a woman named Patrizia who was in love with the local parish priest. And most of these people that I work with were literally crazy. And so at dinner time, she would sit at the dinner table and swear because to her that was a mortal sin, and that meant she had to go to confession to see the priest. So I kind of appreciated her strategic mind. There was Donato, he was about 20 years old, always wore a baseball cap, was like 6'3", and he was very protective of me. And after my shifts at the end of work, I had to walk down this dark alley in Milan to the metro stop, and he'd always walk with me and make sure I got there okay, carrying a toy pistol, which now seems like an extremely bad idea in this day and age, but for some reason didn't bother me at that time. And then there was Marco, who he was about 35, and he had the mentality of a 3-year-old. And he would sit in his room and listen to cassette tapes all day. That was his thing. And he loved going to the bar for a cappuccino. And he loved doing the dishes. He was a great dishwasher. And his way of expressing affection for people was to say, "I'm going to marry you." So at any given time during my work day, he was usually engaged to several people. It didn't matter if they were male or female. But despite all this, love and affection I felt in the community, it was very lonely being in Italy by myself. This was pre-email, pre-cell phone, and all of that. So I'd call home once a week, and that, I had very little contact with people who actually knew me. So I was really excited to start dating an Italian who could help integrate me into the community. But he turned out to be this very hot-headed, stubborn alpha male. And one of his favorite activities was to point out how un-Italian I was and failing in areas of, trying to assimilate. So the one area where I knew I could excel was in the kitchen, and he loved my cooking. And so I thought, one day, thank God, because that was, saving my self-esteem, that one thing that I knew I could excel in. So I decided I'm going to make this great multi-course Italian meal. Cook all day, clean all day. He was working. He came over, and I made eggplant parmesan, which isn't difficult, but sometimes takes a long time because there's a lot of steps. I made a cake. I made fennel and blood orange salad. I bought a bottle of wine instead of a box of wine. It was a very important evening. And so he shows up, sits down. I plate his food, pour a glass of wine from the bottle, and he says, "I'm not going to eat that." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Why aren't you going to eat this food?" "Well, where's the bread? There's no bread." And I said, "Well, oh gosh, I forgot the bread." And I forgot we had an argument about this very thing the week before. But any self-respecting Italian would not serve a meal without bread. So he would not eat it after all of my day of cooking. So I started crying, burst into tears. That was his absolute least favorite thing, is to see me cry. So he got up and left, slammed the door, left. So I was feeling really dejected and sad and lonely and thinking, I'm never going to fit in here. Nobody likes me. I'm not Italian. I don't know what I am. But I have to go to work. I have an overnight shift. So I pull myself together, go down the stairs, and open the door, and I see two figures outside. One of them is pretty tall and has a baseball cap, and the other one is a little shorter with a big belly. And these are my two friends, my two crazy friends from the community. They'd come, they knew nothing about the dinner, but they had happened to come to pick me up. And Marco said, "Renata, vieni a prendere un cappuccino con noi. So come and have a coffee with us." And Donato was there waving with his one arm, and in the other arm he had his toy pistol. Thank you. Thank you.
So moving. Renata Sadunas. So the point is that telling stories can be a fearful exercise, but to learn to tell the story of how we have come to decisions and to tell the story of our emotions is what makes us effective in the business world and in our lives. So do it a lot, and give it up one more time for our 4 storytellers. They were wonderful. And thank you so much. I'm so moved by you all. Thank you.